How you doing tonight? IB Nation Sports Talk. We're up. We are rolling, and we're trying some new things tonight in the continual evolution of the show. I don't know what just happened with Ryan. I don't know if the fact that he disappeared, if he was if that was a prank, or if Ryan is having some issues already.
I blame IB Nation Sports Talk. That's what I blame on this one. This is not my fault, Sean. This is your fault somehow.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
I don't know.
I'll accept it. I'll accept it. How are you tonight?
Oh man, I'm doing well. It's a typical Tuesday grind. I texted with Brian earlier, and I was talking about a potential commitment on Thursday, talking about Orange Streebig a little bit, and he was like, "Isn't that tomorrow?" I'm like, "It's only Tuesday, man." that's kind of the up of the week's been so far. So yeah,
long week for Brian, I guess. I know he had some things going on in his show. I saw on the boards today, and he's got stuff going on out at his house that nobody probably wants to be dealing with. So I'm sure that has elongated his week.
Yes,
but we're doing some different stuff. This is going to be the first of we don't necessarily have an official name for this, but Ryan is going to start popping in on Tuesdays for a little bit, talking draft and recruiting, and I guess kind of whatever else sort of pops up on Tuesday nights. So glad to have you part of the show here going forward.
I'm excited to be here, man. I know we talked about it, just the draft recruiting segments. I talk about whatever the heck you want, Sean. So I'm here for you, brother. I am here for you.
All right. Sounds good. Before we do that, though, I've got a very important question for you.
Okay.
So let's say I've got 2 slices of bread, and between those slices of bread, I lay down some lunch meat, and then maybe I throw on a pickle or 2, some mustard, some lettuce, put that other piece of bread on top. What do I call that, Ryan?
Well, according to the great Earl of Sandwich, which a sandwich was named after, it's a sandwich, Sean. It's a sandwich. Apparently, I said sandwich. I actually don't even think that's true. I think people are just busting on the New Jersey guy because it's an easy target, I guess. But it's a sandwich, my friends.
Sandwich doesn't sound like something a Jersey guy would say.
Yeah. I was talking about the ideal breakfast sandwich, and apparently some people were saying that I said sandwich. Well, let me ask you a question. What is, since you asked me a impromptu question, I would like to ask you, what is the ideal breakfast sandwich? Since everyone likes to talk about sandwiches.
The ideal breakfast sandwich to me is like, can we say brand names on here? Sure. I guess it doesn't matter, but biscuit, sausage, cheese. That is my ideal breakfast sandwich.
There's no meat in there. There's no meat in there. It's just sausage, cheese. Oh, you said sausage. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought you said egg and cheese for a second. My bad. My brain is scrambled, man.
If I have my choice, go to McDonald's, the sausage and egg biscuit, or no, sausage and cheese biscuit, no egg. I've got myself confused now. Yeah.
Oh man, you are angsty, aren't you? You're gonna go no cheese on that biscuit. All right, man. All right. I like it. Sausage, egg, and cheese is the correct combination, Sean. I don't know if you knew this, but there was a right and a wrong answer to that leading question. There was. I don't care what anybody says in the chat, because some people were gonna throw in bacon, egg, and cheese is passable. It's good. It's a good solid sandwich. If anybody threw in a pork roll, egg, and cheese or something like that, then they would be banned from this chat permanently.
I would have to think so as well. I think we're along the same lines anyway with the sausage, egg, and cheese. And love the biscuit. Love the biscuit. There's a couple breakfast spots we go to, and typically kind of do the build my own breakfast sandwich when we do that. When we go to those places. So
love it.
Now I'm hungry.
Right around dinner time too. Right around dinner time. Yep.
Let's talk a little Senior Bowl. Let me start you with this. We're going to talk about specifically the Notre Dame guys. What do you think is more important, the week of practice in the lead up to the game or the game
Yeah.
itself? Which do you think carries more actual weight?
Oh, it's the practice week by far. I talked about this on the message board at boards.com the other day, but Sean, I've been in that side of the business for a good amount of time now. I've known a lot of former and current scouts, still talk to a lot of former and current scouts. I know their thought processes with the week. A lot of scouts don't even stay for the game. They don't even stay for it. They don't care. Scouts are not watching the all 22 of the Senior Bowl either. It is all about the practice week, because you have to think of it this way. When you're talking about putting together an all-star game, it's fun to watch, right? Like people, like average viewers, want to watch it. But when you're talking about getting a true evaluation of how a player looks in that game, there's so much that comes into literally to prepare for a season. They are practicing for weeks and over a month of time, practice time, just to get ready for a first game.
Mm-hmm.
These quarterbacks are throwing the wide receivers for the first time. They're learning a new offense for the first time. Defensively, in the secondary, you're talking about guys that have never called a zone structure together and been able to pass off guys in specific zone coverages. You're talking about defensive linemen that have never played together. You're talking about offensive linemen who have had 3 full practices and 1 walkthrough to gel. I mean, so you're not, they don't care about the game. The long and short of it is they don't care about the game. They want to see in practice players get isolated. That's why everyone talks a lot about the one-on-ones, like that section of practice, the wide receiver DBs, the offensive line, defensive line. They strictly want to see these players individually in person, continue to body type them, see how they do in one-on-one situations, because that's where you can really tell if a guy is tight-hipped, if a guy's loose, if a guy's powerful. Those things are always happening during the practice week. So no one, and I promise you, because I know people keep asking about Sam Hartman, because Sam Hartman had a bad Senior Bowl, right? They cared way more. I promise you, the scouts cared way more about Sam Hartman having a good overall week of practice than having a really bad all-star game. They just don't care that much about the game.
Was it a good week though? I know, unfortunately the interception that we saw, I think on the first day of practice that Cam Hart had came off Sam Hartman. So, somewhat, sure. It's like, oh, great. Cam Hart got the interception. Then it's like, oh, but he got it off Sam Hartman. It seemed like, and again, I know you paid much closer attention to it than I did, but just kind of some things that I have, both kind of watching some of those Senior Bowl practices in the background during the week, when I was doing some other stuff, but then also reading some stuff. It seemed like it was sort of a mixed week for Hartman. So what do you think we can expect now for him going forward in the lead up to the draft? Well, like, did he do himself more good than harm at the Senior Bowl?
I think he did himself more than good. I would say. I think the first and second days he was good overall. I would even say that he was probably one of the more consistent quarterbacks in day 1 and day 2. Day 3 was a little bit of a mixed bag. The third day of practice, he missed a couple deep shots, especially in the practice. The deep ball just in general was not fantastic during that third day overall. But I mean, honestly, Sean, like everybody knew going into that event that he was not going to be the toolsiest quarterback out there. I mean, you had Michael Penix Jr., you had Bo Nix, you had Joe Milton, you've had guys that are, even Michael Pratt's more physically gifted, obviously, than Spencer Rattler is more physically talented than what Sam Hartman is.
Mm-hmm.
But Sam needed to come into that week and show consistency and accuracy and dependability. And he did that. And 2 out of 3 of the days, I thought he played pretty well. I would have argued that out of the first 2 days, he was probably the most consistent quarterback in terms of getting the ball out on time and being accurate with the football. And at the end of the day, this is all relative to expectation, right? Like, I don't think anybody expected Sam Hartman to go down to the Senior Bowl, have the greatest week ever, and be a second-round pick. It's not in the cards, man. And it never was in the cards, to be honest. You needed to come to the Senior Bowl and say he is going to be a backup quarterback in the NFL. So being a backup quarterback, what does that entail? That entails being dependable. That entails being accurate. That entails retaining information quickly and being able to process at a solid rate. And I thought Sam did that throughout the majority of the practice week. So I think that he did help himself. He definitely didn't hurt himself. Maybe you could even say, I guess some people could argue that maybe he was just the same, which is fine. I would accept that answer. But overall, I think he did much more good than bad in the Senior Bowl.
Okay. Joe wants to know if you could attribute the interception to Cam knowing Sam from playing against him and practicing, against him, obviously, at Notre Dame.
If
What
we're,
do you think about
if
that
we're if
aspect?
we're talking about the hitch route where it was against Tez Walker on day one from North Carolina, I would more attribute that to there's no reads on those one-on-ones, right?
You
Sam
know where the
Hartman
ball is
is
going, right?
yes. Oh yeah. Cam Hart knows where the ball's going 100%.
The
He
idea
knows that the
is this is
ball's
going to be
going.
a one-on-one. Yeah, that's
Right.
right.
If he would have thrown a bunch of interceptions in 7-on-7 and team drills, that's much more of a big deal. But in one-on-ones, that ball's coming there. I would attribute that more to, in my opinion, Joe, the fact that Tez Walker ran a really bad route and Cam Hart mugged him the entire time. And mugged him in a good way. Not mugged as in pass interference, throw the flag. Mugged him as in he ran the route for him, basically, and became the wide receiver on that route. So that was much more a great play by Cam, bad play by Tez, and Sam Hartman threw the ball because that was where he's supposed to throw the ball to.
Yeah. And as far as Cam itself, it seems like we all know what Cam Hart can do and how good he is based on the fact that we've watched him for the last few years, especially like the last couple, especially. It felt like he really opened some eyes and kind of became this hidden gem that a lot of people really found out down there in Mobile last week. What do you think?
So the things that I wanted to see from Cam going into that week were ball production, the ball skills, because he only had 2 interceptions during his Notre Dame career, and they both happened in the same football game. It was against Wisconsin a couple years ago. So
Mhm.
you haven't seen Cam create a ton of turnovers when he was in the blue and gold. Now he was very good. I mean, he didn't give up a ton, right? But you wanted to see if he can have the ability to turn the football over, and you wanted to see the transitions working vertically because the one thing about Cam is that he is fast. I think that he's going to run 4.4s, 4.4 high, like 4.47 probably at 6'2" and 7/8 and 204 pounds with 32.5-inch arms. Like he's a physically impressive kid, but you wondered about when a faster, more dynamic vertical receiver is going to open up and run. Can Cam open his hips fast enough to be able to work down the field and to find the football in the air? And that was the one bad rep that he had during the week. It was Javon Baker at UCF that used to play at Alabama. The kid just ran a pure vertical route, and Cam just had a slow transition working vertically, and he lost the football in the air and he couldn't find it, and he wasn't able to recover for a touchdown. Outside of that, though, Cam was locked down pretty much from start to finish, man. He
Mhm.
outside of Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo, who I think was the best corner down in Mobile. I think Cam was in the conversation, maybe the second best corner as far as that week. I mean, he went against Tez Walker from North Carolina that I mentioned earlier all throughout the week. And Tez had some legit top 50 top 50 up conversation going into the week. Like Daniel Jeremiah had him in a first round mock. And for people that know how Daniel Jeremiah does mocks, Sean, it's based upon what he hears, right? It's by his ears, what he's hearing around the league as far as where guys are being projected. So clearly there's some NFL teams that really like Tez Walker. And even though that's the truth, and he's a talented player and he can run vertically really well, Cam Hardy took his lunch money the entire week. He really did. So Cam helped himself big time in Mobile. The remaining thing that you're going to have to see with Cam, because Cam was liked in the NFL circles before the season. I mean, he had some like 3rd round grades from Blesto, NFS, and a couple of scouts before the season. Like he's well liked, but the biggest thing for Cam moving forward here now is when he gets on to Indianapolis, he needs to show that the medicals can check out. I mean, he's got the
Right.
multiple shoulder injuries, obviously, in his career. So there's going to be a question of what those shoulders look like and how they can project long term. But the medicals are going to kind of make or break Cam Hart, in my opinion.
I think so too. I mean,
Yep.
that's it's really the reason he was still here, I think, for another year, just because he
Yeah.
did have that and he still had more that he needed to prove. He wasn't going to come out high enough, if he had gone out a year ago, obviously, because of all the injuries that he had, especially the fact
Absolutely
that
right.
he suffered another one,
Yeah,
so
because he's been well liked by NFL scouts for a couple years, Sean. Because
yeah.
I mean, the things you can't teach, like I can teach a guy to be more disciplined in zone. I can teach him to have better footwork at the line of scrimmage. You can't teach 6'2" and 7/8, so 6'3"
Well, yeah,
with long arms and can run. You
that's what
can't
I was
teach
going to
that.
say. I felt like just watching him in some of those reps, and kind of like you were saying, like when you get to see them sort of doing hand battle in those one-on-ones with the receivers, and a guy like Tez Walker who's physical himself, when you get to see that length and strength on display that a guy like
He
Cam Hart
he
has, I felt that really stood out for him.
he had almost a 78-inch wingspan, which when you hit 80, 80 is like an offensive lineman length, right? Like 80 is like what left tackles plus are going to be looking at a measurement. So 78 inches that's long, man. That's super long. So Cam's got all the tools. You know who would have loved him, Sean, is I don't know if this opens up wounds yet, but Dan Quinn would have been a big fan of Cam Hart, man. He would have been a huge fan of Cam Hart. That is his style.
May still be a fan of Cam Hart, and that may not be good for me in the long run. Like
yes, he might come down to Washington
wearing the Commanders uniform. Yep. That's right. You're exactly right. What about JD Bertrand? Like when we talk about guys who, sort of open some eyes, the fact that he was the fastest linebacker. Now, granted, that's straight line speed, but he's the fastest linebacker and also voted the top linebacker by the offensive linemen and the running backs while he was down there. What's all this mean, do you think, for JD Bertrand?
I really don't think it moves the needle that much for a draft process perspective, because I asked myself, did JD show me anything in Mobile that I wasn't expecting? Like the guys that really move the needle one way or the other are players that exceed or fall below expectation. What I saw from JD during the week was JD is incredibly smart, retains knowledge very well. I mean, he was helping to get defenses set up on like day one of practice. I mean, he was doing that. He's a smart dude. There's no doubt. And Sean, I always believed for me that he was a pretty fast kid. Like I always thought he was. I mean, he can move. I always expect him to run in somewhere in the 4.6s when he comes out. So I think he's going to test well. I think he showed in the Senior Bowl that he can run pretty well, but he also showed in the Senior Bowl where his deficiencies are, unfortunately, as far as when he was in one-on-one pass coverage, he just can't change direction well enough all the time. And then he's got the shorter arms. He's only 30.5 inches, where closing passing windows, right? Being able to get your hand and get that reach in there, there's just going to be some limitations there, right? So I think going into the week, I thought JD was going to be a mid to late day 3 player regardless, because he's just a little bit of a shorter armed, limited guy. And I think that he came out the same way. Like, I don't think JD having because he did have a good week, there's no doubt, but did he have such a week that it's like, we're going to go from 7th round pick to 4th round pick? Like, I didn't see that type of week, but he had a good week overall. And I think JD has a chance to stick in the NFL short term, because you need those guys that are super dependable.
Sure. DK, do you know JD's wants to know if you know JD's wingspan by any chance?
Yeah, I don't have the exact inches off the top of my head, but he was 75 and maybe like 3/8 somewhere in that ballpark. It was actually better than I thought it was going to be, DK, because he has 30.5-inch arms, right? I think it was 30 4/8 or 30 5/8, so right around 30.5, which is a short number. Like anything under, and honestly, anything under 32 is short for a linebacker, but under 31 is very short for a linebacker. But actually, Sean, I expected him to have like 74-inch arms. I mean, wingspan, sorry, 74-inch wingspan, because that's just usually how that works. But he having over 75 tells me that JD has pretty broad shoulders, if nothing else. So it kind of increases the wingspan a little bit. So the wingspan wasn't bad. It's still below average for NFL standards for a linebacker, but it was better than what I had perceived that it might be with the arm length.
I think what's going to help him is those combine numbers. And just like you said, like he's going to show up and he's going to look pretty good wearing the spandex. He's going to run good times and things like that. So he's not going to hurt himself with those numbers that he's going to put up. But the problem is, for today's NFL, he's sort of on the wrong side of even being a tweener, really, because of the other measurables that you talked about.
If JD was playing in the NFL about 15, 20 years ago, I think he has more of an opportunity to not just be a fringe rosterable player and be an actual, potential starter in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because it was a much more run-centric game 15, 20 years ago.
Yes.
It's just not that game anymore, Sean. Like, guys need to play in space, right? Like, to play in space, you need two different things, typically. You either need one of length or overall just twitch and athleticism, change of direction stuff. When you have both, that's when you're a super difference maker on obvious passing situations. When you don't have either, that's where things get a little bit trouble, right? Like you usually need one to overcompensate for the other. I think JD just unfortunately is a little bit below average in both those areas, which will always keep him limited to just being an early down run stopper. And the problem is that we used to call it 2-down player. You're a 2-down player, first and second down. Well, is it really 2 downs anymore? Where every team is in nickel more than 50% of the time? I don't even think it's a 2-down player anymore. I would say it's a 1 down. I would say it's a 1.5 down. Like it's not 2 downs anymore. It's just not.
Of course, what's interesting about this conversation is the guy who played right next to him, who's on the other side of this conversation, who people see as potentially, well, he's a 3rd down player. Forget first and second down. Marist Liufau, can he be just a 3rd down player and rush the quarterback and, maybe play in space a little bit and those kind of things? One of the most interesting things was, that day that they put up everyone's times, like they, up on the scoreboard there, and where JD Bertrand, fastest linebacker, and they had Hartman's time up there. I think he was the fastest quarterback, but they had Marist Liufau listed with the defensive lineman. Is this where you think he is looked at by NFL types? Is he more lineman than linebacker?
I don't think so. I think that's more a roster construction thing for a Senior Bowl, as far as like maybe you're a defensive lineman short, so you're going to throw Marist technically as a defense lineman, because he didn't do defensive lineman drills all week, Sean. Like he wasn't doing one-on-ones against the offensive lineman. Like he was playing weak inside linebacker a lot of the time with JD Bertrand right next to him.
Right side by side. Yeah.
Yep. He brings a very interesting combination though, which I think is interesting for the next level. I had a scout that I was texting during the Senior Bowl text me a name of a comparison. It was Tranquill, who plays for the Carolina Panthers, who's a very good player, Tranquill. But Frankie's also he's a versatile second-level player. I wouldn't necessarily call him a Mike. I wouldn't necessarily call him a Will. I wouldn't call him a Sam. I wouldn't really put a position next to him, Sean. Like they blitz him from random spots. They let him play in man-to-man coverage at times. They utilize him all over the place. And I think that's how Marist is kind of viewed around the league, is that he really is kind of a positionless second-level defender, because you look at his profile and you're like 6'2", 239, 34-inch arms, which is just a ridiculous for context, right? We remember, of course, you remember Isaiah Foskey. And what was Isaiah Foskey lauded for? It was his length. He was so long, a long defensive end. Marist Liufau has the same arm length as Isaiah Foskey, which is just wild to think about. 79-inch wingspan, 34-inch arms. He is a very long second-level defender. So I think some NFL teams are going to struggle with him a little bit, because where does he play 100%? The Sam linebacker position's becoming a kind of obsolete, because just teams don't play as much base anymore. So is he a guy that can play Will full-time? Is he a guy that we just throw a linebacker title on, but we're going to utilize him all over the field, let him work against some slots and some tight ends occasionally in man-to-man coverage? Are we going to blitz him from A to B all the way out to off the edge? I think that Marist needs to make a living based upon being a positionless second-level defender that can also really help on special teams.
Okay. I can see that. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, couple comments I wanted to throw in here.
Sure.
From the chat. Big Licks Burner says, does JD give you Drew Tranquill vibes? And Michael followed that up by saying, if Drew can play linebacker, JD should be okay. Your thoughts?
Oh man, I think Drew's a completely different athlete than JD, man. I mean, their straight line speed actually, no, I'm not even going to say that. I was going to say their straight line speed might be comparable, but I mean, even Drew ran like 4.58 at the combine or something like that. Like he could run, man. Drew could run. I think JD
Drew just couldn't play the back. He just couldn't play safety. He was just better closer to the line of scrimmage is what it came down to. And when you talk about the differences, like Drew couldn't cover on the back end, but again, closer to the line of scrimmage where the space is different and who you're covering is different. He could do that.
And I think that's what makes him such a different athlete, is that experience playing safety. Drew is much more a space move and flip his hips and change direction guy than what JD is. Like Drew could do those things, which is why he started his career as a safety at Notre Dame, to your point, right? So just a different type of athlete. I know there's going to be some comparisons because he's a white linebacker that had shorter arms coming out of Notre Dame, but JD is a straight line, just strictly straight line athlete, which there's nothing wrong with, but it limits you a little bit. Drew was much more change direction, flip your hips, being able to run with guys. Yes, he was going to miss some tackles, like JD was going to miss some tackles, but he just didn't. Drew just offered him a lot more upside in the passing game than what JD is going to be able to do.
Right. Because Drew started off, and I'm not trying to knock Bertrand, but again, like the fact that he had safety skills and then essentially moved closer to the line of scrimmage, started playing, because remember, he was playing rover first before he even moved inside and started playing more inside. There's just different things that he was able to do because of the fact that he was, one, such a great athlete, two, played safety before he made that move. Ultimately, it just became obvious that safety was not the way to go for him. And I mean, it obviously turned out to be a great career move for him.
Yes.
Transitioning to linebacker. So
he's about to play in the Super Bowl, baby. So I think it worked out pretty good for him. I would agree.
That's right. Javontae Jean-Baptiste. He was on my list. Tyler asking if he was at the Senior Bowl. He was. I thought it was interesting. He was on the team. He was on the American team, I think. Like the rest of the Notre Dame guys were on the national team. Is that because he was a late ad, right?
Yeah. So he was supposed to go to the East-West Shrine Bowl that played down in Texas this year. They were in Frisco. They were in Las Vegas last year, and he was. I think it was the day because both the games overlap a little bit. So the East-West was already practicing. And then I had gotten word on, I guess it was last Monday or not this past Monday, the Monday before, that he was getting the call up to the Senior Bowl because someone actually reported that he was injured and not participating in the East-West game. But in reality, it was just he was sitting out because he was getting the Senior Bowl call up. So he went down to Mobile. I reported this and I did a little bit of a breakdown on the message board for like just boards.irishbreakdown.com exclusive people, but it just wasn't a great week for Javontae, to be honest with y'all, man. Like
definitely
I
had
don't
the
know.
Quietest week of any of the Notre Dame guys, I thought.
Sean, the only time I saw him in practice was unfortunately him losing reps. Like the one highlight of the week was Patrick Paul from Houston, the offensive tackle, just kind of got like Javontae tried to go straight into his chest in a pass 1-on-1. He kind of bodied him up and then just slammed him to the turf. He wasn't good all week. And then I don't even know if he played in the game. Like I did not notice him once in the football game. So unfortunately, it just wasn't a great week. And it was a big opportunity, obviously. And I just, unless Javontae goes to probably a pro day guy, I don't know if he'll get a combine invite. I don't know if he has, but wherever he ends up testing, he needs to show out, man. He needs to, because right now I think the conversation is that the kid's a grinder. The kid's pretty physical, has decent length, but is he a twitched up athlete that is going to give us a ton in passing downs and in situational parts of the game? Just not sure that he is that type of dude, right? Like I think that he has a chance to go late day 3. I would say that he's probably 7th round to PFA right now. So it just was not a great week, unfortunately, for Javontae Jean-Baptiste.
Yeah. I mean, again, when you look at the way the game has changed, like those big physical, like a Neil Smith type defensive end, for example, you don't see as many of those kind of guys anymore in today's game. It's all much more Von Miller type bodies and, DeMarcus Ware's, and DeMarcus Ware is even, probably on the bigger side, compared to, what you're seeing these days. So it's just a different game now, I think.
Yeah, he's going to have to show value on special teams to be able to stick on the next level because he's a late day 3 player at best. And I think that there are some questions as far as I think he's a solid athlete, but is he anything plus where I could say he's going to be on every coverage unit, right? Like he's going to be on kick coverage. He's going to be on punt coverage because he has good straight line speed. Like I'm just not sure. I'm just ultimately not sure. So I hope that he shows out and has a nice pro day and he goes later on in the 2024 NFL draft. But if I had to lean right now, unfortunately, I'd probably say that he goes undrafted. He's probably a priority free agent. He'll be in a camp. There's no doubt about it. With the production he had playing for Ohio State and Notre Dame and the size profile he has, I just have a little bit of questions as far as what his upside is on the next level.
Jesse has been sitting in the on deck circle, and
Jesse, hi man.
Jesse, we started off. We talked a little bit about Sam Hartman. I'll let you ask Ryan your Sam Hartman question that I saw you just throw up there in the chat before we.
Well, I mean, Sam Hartman, he kind of got unfairly the Penix thing kind of unfairly put him in a bad spot because I watched not the whole thing, but
Penix didn't play, so
right.
Sam Hartman basically played almost all the snaps.
Yeah, and exactly. And I feel like that didn't put Sam in a bad spot, and I felt like a couple drives stalled, and that necessarily wasn't Sam's fault either. And then they missed field goals as well, so it looked like they didn't get anything out of the drives. But just looking at it and looking at the box score, you would say that like he had a bad day. I guess I would just like, would you agree with that as a whole? Like, did he have an overall bad day?
I think there's context needed to it, right? Like, I think that two things can be true, Jesse, in my opinion, right? One is, did Sam have a good game? No. No, he did not. Was it quite as bad as a 7 for 25 for 69 yards? Also, no, because, I mean, there were some drops in there. There were some wide receivers in bad spots. There were some good defensive plays. I don't think Sam was quite as bad as what the box score could say, but was he good either? No, he wasn't good, unfortunately.
Well, the thing, I guess what I was getting at is it felt like Sam Hartman needed to have a good day to kind of get back on the radar, essentially. And I felt like he didn't do anything to necessarily help himself at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the podcast, Jesse, but like for the scouting side of this, teams don't really care about the game as much. They don't. Okay. I mean, would it have been nice because they care about the practices? I mean, it's kind of very well known at this point, but like a lot of scouts don't even stay to watch the game because they just don't care that much. They definitely don't watch the old 22 of it. They just really don't.
Yeah.
But would it have been nice? Because I thought Sam actually had a pretty good week. Like I thought it was a good, solid week for Sam. Would it have been nice if he would have just went into the game and just balled out and did really well, and you just kind of put a bow on the week? It would have been great, right? It would have been good. I mean, I don't think anybody would have doubted that one. But I just think that I think people are just going to hyper focus on the one day when in reality there were 3 full days of practice and a walkthrough of evaluation that happened before that were much more important than what the 7 for 25 would tell you.
Gotcha.
And that's why those coaching staffs like to work the Senior Bowl, like they send a whole coaching staff down there because they get so much. Like, one, the fact that you're coaching at the Senior Bowl means you weren't in the playoffs. And, in the case of the national team, I believe it was the Jets who were doing a lot of that. I know it was the Jets defensive coordinator who was running a lot of the stuff down there. But they'll tell you they get one-on-one with so many of these guys, and it gives them just that much more evaluation throughout the week than just what you're going to get on that Saturday.
A lot of availability. You got the one-on-one, obviously interview section of the week. You have obviously the one-on-one aspect, but also it's about, I mean, especially for Sam Hartman, it's all about retention. Like these coaches on the coaching staff they're going to purposely throw a lot of information at these quarterbacks and a lot of these players just to see how much they can retain in a short amount of time. Like that aspect of it is something that people don't talk about enough, but it absolutely matters.
So we were talking breakfast sandwiches at the start of the show, and our choices apparently were brought into question. Please find a therapist if you pick sausage over bacon. And then someone else said, who picks sausage over bacon? Now, I'll clarify. If I'm building my breakfast sandwich, I got the biscuit, I got the sausage, I got the cheese. Now that's my sandwich. As a side, I would go bacon over sausage every time. On the sandwich itself, I want it a little heartier, so I'm going with the sausage on the sandwich, but bacon is my protein on the side. So just so we're clear.
It's a completely different conversation. We're talking about breakfast sides versus breakfast sandwiches, right? Like it is completely different. I can just house some bacon. Like if you just get me some bacon that is on the cusp of done and burnt, I could eat that thing all day, man. Just give me it. Just keep shoveling it. Just keep shoveling it, right?
Bacon. Oh.
Yeah. And I'm not going to turn away, Sean. Like if someone came up to me and was like, hey, do you want this really good bacon, egg, and cheese on a bagel or whatever? I would eat it.
Not going to turn it down.
I'm not going to say no, but if I had the choice to bacon, egg, and cheese on a sesame bagel, sausage, egg, and cheese on a sesame bagel, that is the go-to. That's the go-to.
Okay. I like where your head's at.
Love it.
No comment, Jess?
I used to be an only bacon guy, but now I'm a sausage. I prefer the sausage on my sandwiches. But I will never, like you guys said, I will never order just a side of sausage, I always usually order a side of bacon.
Never do a
like
side of sausage. It's
a
always
biscuit or
side
a
of bacon.
bagel with sausage, egg, and cheese is really where it's at.
Jesse, I think the more important question is if you're getting a sausage, egg, and cheese on a bagel or whatever bread you choose in your sandwich, are you going sausage links or sausage patty? And that's
Patty.
A very interesting debate. Is it? Is it easy to patty? It is for me too, but I think there is a
it's
debate.
It's easier to eat. It's nice and flat. With the links, you have to worry about, like, you could eat a whole link in a bite, and then now half your sausage on the sandwich is gone.
Yeah. Patty on the sandwich. If I was gonna, if I was gonna do sausage on the side, I would want it to be links on the side.
Yes, agreed. See, Sean, I knew I liked you, man. That is a fantastic combination right there. Absolutely.
That's right. All right, Ryan. Well, appreciate you as always. And again, this is going to be a new Tuesday thing. So Ryan will be in next Tuesday, and we'll see what we've got to talk about at that point.
Sir.
Whether it's recruiting, NFL draft, we've got all kinds of stuff.
Dinner sandwiches.
Yes, sir. Power rank the dinner sandwiches next week. That's what I'm down for. Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Take it easy, Ryan. All right. Ryan Roberts, recruiting man. Now, we've got a new segment that we're also debuting tonight called Jesse's Whiteboard Wagers. This is one that is sweeping the nation. Word of mouth has built up to this moment, Jess.
Yeah, there was a lot of pressure. I can't be giving out bad stuff. But the thing about it is,
before we get into this is for entertainment purposes only. Don't forget that.
It's just to see, the logic, the thinking, the building to potentially. Here's what I would have to say about sports gambling. Is it still, relatively luck? Sure, but you can do your thing. You can do things to get closer, giving yourself an advantage at that luck rather than blindly throw in, darts at the wall.
What you're going to show us is some of your own data that helps potentially remove some of the luck. It narrows it down a little bit, because of tendencies and those kind of things, correct?
Yeah, tendencies, I would say, and then
past performance, past results.
Yeah, okay. So it's a continuous thing. Like I've tried tinkering with different equations and stuff before, and I think I'll do that once I have some more free time. And it's a lot easier to do this kind of stuff now because tonight I'm going to look at NBA bets, and
Friday you're going to bring us some Super Bowl stuff.
Yeah,
right?
Friday is going to be strictly Super Bowl and all football, but today it's still the same logic. Whether you're looking at NBA, MLB, football, there's a couple just kind of logical things that I think you should look at every time, and a big consideration is play how they performed in similar matchups type situation. Have they played this team before, and that sort of thing.
All right. Well, without any further ado, break out your whiteboard and let's get into it.
All right. So I have this, basically what I have is this screen or this cover that's covering all my stuff, and I'm just going to kind of reveal it as I go.
Okay.
So that's kind of the plan. All right. So I just kind of came up with a few steps here and there. Of again, general guidelines for how I like to look at bets. The first thing that I always look at, no matter if you're football, baseball, basketball, is you always try to find evenly matched opponents. And the biggest reason that you want to look for evenly matched opponents is you want to avoid games where there's going to be blowouts, so starters could come out early, just stuff like that. And so, especially in the NBA, you want games that are going to be competitive from start to finish. So that's kind of the number one thing I'll look at is, I'll look at today, Tuesday, I'll look at, okay, here's all the NBA games today. Let me at least look at what games are going to be relatively close, right? What's going to be a competitive game. And so that's the first step. Second step would be, of the evenly matched games, find opponents who have played each other at least twice this season. And that's why I was getting into is, I like to bet on events where the teams have already played each other because it gives you more of a pattern of what potentially could happen. And so that just narrows down the pool of games that you're going to look at, right? Because like I said, first step was look at evenly matched games. Second game was find opponents who have played each other, at least twice this season. That's kind of the rule I'm using for the NBA. Step 3, select your games. And if I could pull this down right, the games I picked for today were the Oklahoma City Thunder versus the Utah Jazz and the Orlando Magic versus the Miami Heat. The Thunder and Jazz have played each other twice this season, while the Magic and Heat have played each other 3 times this season. So I really liked the Magic and Heat game because they have 3 matchups already this season. So tonight is going to be their 4th matchup. It's a lot easier to look at, trends because they've played each other over 3 games already. And then step 4 would be, looking at the injury report. And then that's just kind of looking to see, in these games, are any of the star players going to be out? Like, is Jimmy Butler going to be out tonight? Is for like Oklahoma City, would Shai Gilgeous-Alexander potentially be out tonight? And so that's what you want to look for, is just making sure no one is on the injury report. Because the last thing you want to do is bet something, and then they tell you that
Have
this
the player be out.
Yeah, because it's just going to affect everyone else's lines essentially, right? Because if the number 1 player is out, well, it's likely that the number 2 player is going to get more shot attempts or etc. So always a good idea to look at the injury report. And then from there, you want to, select your key players to focus on, or you want to pick guys that are going to have high usage. And what I mean by high usage in terms of basketball is, guys that are going to have a lot of minutes. They're going to be on the floor predominantly the entire time, and guys who get a lot of field goal attempts. Like no matter what, the offense is built around these guys are going to get at least 15 shots a night. And so that's kind of, the next step of determining what players you want to look at. So for the Thunder tonight, I am going to look at SGA, and then I'm going to look at Chet Holmgren. I hope you guys like the graphics I put in there.
Who is SGA?
Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Okay.
It's a lot. He's a Canadian basketball player. Hard to say his name, so I just put SGA. He's an all-star, so he's a common name. And then for the Heat, I looked at Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, and Jimmy Butler. And have you seen that this is how Jimmy Butler showed up to his media day photo?
Wow. That is something.
And then from there, for the Magic, I looked at Paolo Banchero, Duke guy, and then Franz Wagner, also for the Magic. And again, these are guys that are all going to get high usage, guys that are going to be out there every night, playing a lot of minutes, at least 30 minutes. And then for the Jazz, I looked at Lauri Markkanen and Colin Sexton. So these, again, we went through the process of identifying games. Of those games, what matchups do you like? Evenly close, matched up teams, and then teams that have played each other a little bit this season. So that is the first slide. I will take us now to the second one. And so from here, it's just kind of all about building the data at this point. And so I usually build kind of my own spreadsheets, but this is kind of what I was looking at tonight. In terms of Thunder versus Jazz, first thing I looked at was, averages against that team, road average, season average. And then you look at, the FanDuel over under all the way on the right. And so you want to look at, FanDuel over under, and then how that compares to, I picked different averages, season average, road average, and then the average against that team this season. And then I'm predominantly just looking to see how close that is to FanDuel's over-under. And so you can see, for SGA, his points, FanDuel over-under is 31.5 versus the Jazz. He's 30.5. His road average is 31. His season average is 31.1, and his over-under is 31.5. That's sharp. Like, I'm not gonna mess with that, because it's like all of his averages are,
right on that line.
Yeah, right on that line. And so when you're looking at this stuff, you're just kind of trying to look for common outliers, something that sticks out when compared to the FanDuel over-under. So for this Thunder game, I really like Chet Holmgren's under of 17.5. He's against the Jazz this season. He's gone 15.5. His road average is 16. His season average is basically 17. I just like that number being lower. And then in terms of the next game, the Magic versus Heat, this is the game I really liked a lot. Oh, and then I guess I'd be failed to, or be remiss not to say, like, I like to use StatMuse, and it's a website where you can literally type in everything I'm looking for. And I typed in like Bam Adebayo averages against the Magic this season, and it instantly, gives me the results I want. He's got 20.
And what website is this again?
It's called statmuse.com.
Okay.
And you could type just about any sports stat in there, and they're probably gonna have the answer for you. Like, you could type in, like Barry Bonds home runs versus the NL, and it would tell you how many home runs he has in his career against the National League. It has just about any stat that you could look for. And so from there,
I don't know why you've never told me that website before, but that's okay.
Then the last thing I looked at
would have been nice to know that a website like that exists. Don't worry about me, though.
Yeah, I won't worry about you, though. So when looking at the Magic versus Heat game, again, the far right column, you can kind of see the FanDuel over-unders, some of the stats that I built. One thing I really like in this game is Banchero's rebounds, because you can see versus the Heat this season in 3 games, he's got almost 9 rebounds, and his line is at 6.5. So that is what I would say is my best bet today, or the one that I feel the best about, is Banchero over on the rebounds. And so again, I just built these, look to see, what kind of numbers were outliers, how they compared to the FanDuel over under. And then from there is really when you get to the fun part.
And you're really what you're doing when you're building them like that is you're looking to see where there is a bigger difference. Whatever if the over under is 17, but the data that you're seeing on that specific player says like 12, that gives you a much greater confidence in whether or not to move on something.
Exactly. And so
whereas if the over under is 17, but the data that you're seeing on the player says 16, where it's closer, you want to stay away from that.
Yeah, so like you want to, whether it's the over or the under, you want to find numbers that are greater away from that over under, right? Because like anything that's super close, it's like, it's not really worth it to mess with, right? Like that's right around what he's going to average just about on every night. But if you can find kind of a statistical outlier of, or, I guess the best way to put it is like how many standard deviations it would be away from the original number, that's going to give you a better idea that number is an outlier, maybe something to act on. And so, based off of the data I did, here are the three bets I came up with this evening. So for the Magic and Heat game, like I said, I liked Banchero's.
Again, for entertainment purposes only.
Yeah, but you got to show the people that you're really following up with what you're saying here. I'm not just throwing stuff out there. These are the things that I put money on tonight. Clearly, I didn't show you how much, but I did build these bets and place them.
Okay.
Like I said, Banchero over 6.5 rebounds. Adebayo over 16.5 points. I liked Adebayo because he's averaging like around 20 points against the Magic this season, and his over-under is at 16.5. Jimmy Butler, I like his over on points because he's been on a pretty much a tear recently. He's been over 20 points ever since being back from injury. He only played the Magic 1 time this season out of the 3 times they've played due to injury. So I really didn't consider his stats a whole bunch because it was just 1 game, and everyone else on the team had played them 3 times. But I feel like, when the Heat really play well, it's when Jimmy Butler's playing well. So I like his over and points. And then moving on to the Thunder and Jazz game, like I said, I liked Holmgren's under. I think that number is a little high from him. And like we saw, he averages around 15 a game against the Thunder this season. And then I really liked Colin Sexton's over at 19.5. And what was interesting about him is his season average is right around this number. But in the 2 games that he's played against the Thunder, he's dropped over 20 points. In 1 game, he came off the bench. He wasn't even the starter. The game that he was the starter, he had about 32 points. And then the game that he came off the bench, he had 20 points. So in both instances, He hit this, and now he is the full-time point guard starter. So I think he's easily going to hit that 19.5. And then, like I said, I put the Banchero rebounds on its own because that's what I felt best about. And I didn't want it to get lost in a parlay.
Any of the parlays. Gotcha.
Yeah, that's kind of like the insurance. So like I put a little bit on, like $10 on these parlays each, but then I'd put like $30 on Banchero. So if either of these lose, I'm going to make up my money, and hopefully gain $5-10. But obviously there's a chance that all of them lose and you lose all of your money. But
right.
The single line is more or less trying to maybe recoup, if your parlays don't go how you expect them to.
Gotcha.
And then last but not least, I had a little bit of a teaser because we're going to football on Friday. And this is something I built earlier in the week that I felt really good about, just kind of like a lottery ticket. And I think the best way to do football games, and we'll get into this on Friday, is you kind of have to think how the game is going to go. So if you think the Chiefs are going to win, what is the formula that the Chiefs play to win? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's kind of, in this one you can see I have Chiefs money line, but I
How
also
are the Chiefs going to get to that victory? If the Chiefs are going to get to that victory, these things have to happen.
Right. Like Patrick Mahomes probably has to throw for over 260, probably has to throw more than two touchdown passes. I'm assuming Travis Kelce will have a big game and get another touchdown. And so, like, again, this is a lottery ticket because it's, almost plus 4,000. But again, it's better than going to the gas station and buying a $20 scratch off, in my opinion, right? Because again, like this feels like more of an educated guess, I guess is the best way to put it. So
the odds are greater that those are going to hit than the numbers are going to hit on the lottery on Friday or Saturday or whatever.
Exactly. And so if I'm going to burn $5, I'd burn it on this parlay rather than, get random Powerball numbers like you were talking about. So that's kind of how I view these lottery tickets is, yeah, it is a lottery, but I have a better chance than, again, going to play the local lottery.
Gotcha. All right. Good stuff. Interesting stuff. And again, Jesse will bring more Super Bowl stuff on Friday. We had the request last week to do Super Bowl props on our Friday show, so we'll be doing that. And Jesse will bring some more of his own props with that in as well.
I think we got to keep track. You'll be the official scorekeeper of overall record and profits losses if we're going to continue this segment. So got to keep the winning percentage up.
Got to be the scorekeeper. That's right.
Yes.
In the meantime, Jess, are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's do it.
All right. So, at his recent media session, Riley Leonard had this to say when he was asked about why he entered the transfer portal when he decided to leave Duke.
Well, the portal was never really anything I really thought of, until I got hurt, and I was just like, dude, I got 1 year left of this. I'm a risk taker. My whole life I've just been a risk taker, so I was like, look, I got one shot. 20 years from now, I want to, look back and say I gave it everything I had, and I ended up here, and I think this is the best place to get me to my dream of playing in the NFL.
So Riley Leonard says he's a risk taker. Jess, how much of a risk taker do you want your quarterback to be?
I want my quarterback to be a risk taker just because I think that's what ultimately, wins big games. And especially, in the sport of football, I feel like the quarterback is the biggest or, it has the most impact on the game. Your quarterback has the most impact on, unless you just have like this incredible defense that can stop everything, then of course you're not going to be as risk-takey. But I think in college football today that you have to score points. And I still think there is something to be said about like a calculated, risk taker. I don't want a guy who's just closing his eyes and chucking the ball up there. You could still be a competitive, calculated risk taker. And I think for someone, for a program that wants to win and go to that next level, and an offense that struggled last season, I think you need a risk taker. I think that when you look at a lot of Heisman quarterbacks, the common denominator is a risk taker. That's what Patrick Mahomes literally is. Just about every game is a risk taker. He makes throws. He does things that you're traditionally not supposed to do, and that is ultimately what made him, who he is. And again, I don't think you just can't have regret when it's all said and done. I'd rather say, I took some risks. I'm willing to die or on the stone of those risks, but I would rather have that than regret something and be like, wow, I wish I would have, done this.
James says risk takers make dumb plays. I mean, I guess it depends on what kind of risk
but
it
they
is.
also win you games.
That's right. You just mentioned Patrick Mahomes. He's been in the Super Bowl 4 times in 5 years. So has he ever made some dumb plays? Sure, but he has also found ways to make plays. And like Brett Favre, but like they called him a riverboat gambler and gunslinger and all those different things. Like if you look at Sam Hartman, for example, I think that like the mistakes that Sam Hartman made, I don't think you can attribute them to necessarily taking risks. I think it was because, there was more hesitancy sometimes than anything in the kind of mistakes that he made. Look at Ian Book. Like Ian Book was not going to, try to force the issue downfield. He was going to protect the ball at all costs. Now, you want that in a quarterback. You don't want a quarterback who's just going to turn the ball over, obviously, willy-nilly. But there was that hesitancy, that conservative nature to Ian Book that wasn't necessarily going to push the envelope. So what you had was good enough at times, but it was not great. And I think that if you're willing to, again, I'm not saying, that you're going to go out there and you're throwing every ball into tight windows and, making every ball a 50-50 ball and seeing what your receivers are going to get you. But at the same time, I think you have to live a little bit more on that edge, risk reward and that whole thing. Like if you're truly going to be able to achieve some kind of greatness, I think you have to be willing to live on that edge a little bit more sometimes. I think we're together on that.
Yes.
So Leonard also discussed going up against his former Duke head coach, Mike Elko, when the Fighting Irish open up the season against Elko and Texas A&M down in Texas. Have a listen.
I thought about that when I finished. Oh, man, it's so funny texting them. Coach Elko and I obviously have a great relationship, and we're able to joke around about the fact that we'll be playing each other. And then, of course, he brought like a lot of the Duke coaching staff with him, who I'm obviously super close with as well. So I'm gonna have to get out to the game like super early and meet everybody, and go crack some jokes with them. But this is gonna be a big one, for both of our prides, and I'm excited for that.
So there's Riley Leonard talking about facing his former head coach Mike Elko in Texas A&M. Who is it bigger for this first game of the 2024 season? Riley Leonard, Mike Elko.
Whew, that's a tough one. There's a lot of headlines that'll be going into this game, right? Like it'll be Notre Dame versus Texas A&M to start the season. And so no matter what the past record was, it's a brand new season. There's new expectations, there's new anticipation, etc. And now you add, Notre Dame has Riley Leonard at the transfer quarterback, and he's going against his old head coach from Duke. And while there is always going to be pressure on Texas A&M because of their Texas A&M, and Jimbo Fisher got fired because he wasn't winning enough, right? Like winning there is a priority, but Marcus Freeman's team is better built. He's in year 3. He's not in year 1. Notre Dame is going with the transfer portal quarterback. It is on the road. And again, they are going to be the favorite team. So I would have to believe, because Riley Leonard represents Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman, and everything else that's happened to this point, that there is more on Riley Leonard in this situation than there is on Elko at Texas A&M. It's his first game. I don't know I don't think the expectations are quite as high for the new coach game 1 of his first season than it is for coach that's in his 3rd season that chose the quarterback that he wanted to, be a starter for Notre Dame.
If you ask the Texas A&M alumni base, you might get a different answer.
Right. But if you ask, the college football world,
the spotlight is bigger at Notre Dame. And as DK said, I asked the question, who's it bigger for, Riley Leonard or Mike Elko? DK with actually the proper response. Marcus Freeman, that's exactly right, because you're loaded for bear now. You're bringing your next transfer portal quarterback in, Riley Leonard. You got another one of the best quarterbacks in the country, supposedly, going on the road, opening up the season, the whole thing. And that's exactly why it's bigger for Riley Leonard, because he said in the same setting with the media last week that if he hadn't suffered that injury, he's probably getting ready for the NFL right now. And part of what this season is about for Riley Leonard, just like it was for Sam Hartman last year, is to get himself ready for the NFL, but to come in and elevate his level of play by being at Notre Dame. And he's also going to elevate his profile by being at Notre Dame. But by elevating your profile, you're going to be on national TV every week, and there are going to be a lot of expectations. There are going to be a ton of expectations, most of them on Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman and Riley Leonard going into this game. So it has to weigh more on Leonard than even Mike Elko, because like you said, it's year one. Like the alumni probably expect immediate, results down there, but season one, game one, compared to season 3 for Marcus Freeman, game one, there's a heck of a lot more expectations with the blue and gold.
Did you know that game was a week 0 game this season, August 31st?
Is it?
I just Googled it because I just wanted to look at tickets, and it says that the event is August 31st.
Interesting. Let me look at something here real quick. I don't remember seeing that off the top of my head, but
lowest ticket prices $300 right now.
Yeah, they still don't have it on the Notre Dame side. I didn't think that they would, but well, interesting. Yeah, I mean, they're going to go for a lot. Carberry says right now A&M is favored. Who the favorite is in February is largely irrelevant, but unless you're Vegas, I guess. So another Notre Dame quarterback, the freshman CJ Carr, asked his thoughts on his recruiting rankings that he had in high school over the last couple of years, and if there is any extra motivation for him as a result of those recruiting rankings. And here is what CJ Carr said to that.
I haven't looked at rankings for 2 years now. As much as I respect the guys who do it, I don't know how well they can evaluate anyone. So that's a thing that I don't even think it would push me to at all, because I don't really care what any of them have to say anyways.
CJ Carr's response, Jesse, is blank.
CJ Carr's response is very mature, to be honest with you. A guy that is coming in early, a true freshman. When you're younger, it seems, and this goes for any sport, a lot of guys at any level, whether or not you're entering, the college realms as a freshman or you're entering the professional league as a rookie, I would say that a common error, and even me myself, a rookie of the Irish Breakdown team, is you get caught up on what other people say about you at times, and really, it doesn't matter, right? Because you were at your end goal. CJ Carr's end goal was to play quarterback at Notre Dame. My end goal is to provide good content on this show. Other guys, basketball players, want to be great, rookie players and potentially win Rookie of the Year, right? And so often I feel like these younger players, podcasters, whoever, get caught up again with what everyone else is, saying. And I just think it's a very mature route to say, you know what, I'm just going to focus on my goals, what I'm trying to accomplish, and really all the outside noise isn't going to faze me.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great response, and he had been committed for a couple of years. So, the recruiting rankings, that's when his rankings started, to change. after his commitment to, like people can blame it on, well, it's Notre Dame bias and all that kind of stuff. It's not as much Notre Dame bias. It's because he's committed and was so steadfast in his commitment. There is less reason for these recruiting services to hype him as opposed to other quarterbacks. That's part of how the game is played. Other people who are still subscribing to that stuff. But it also reminds me a little bit, because like you said, he is at his end goal now. He has signed on the dotted line. He is at Notre Dame. None of that stuff matters anymore. But like the Kyle Hamilton stuff, it just amazes me how like bitter so many Notre Dame fans of Kyle Hamilton still are about, this whole, like Kyle Hamilton was slighted in the draft process or whatever. The guy was still selected 14th overall. He was still the first round pick, still selected right in the middle, just outside the top 10. But people act like he was a 5th round pick and, like every team passed him over 8 times or something.
He was still the
like
14th best player in the draft.
Right. He was the 14th best player in the draft. But people are like, oh, I can't believe the hate Kyle Hamilton got. Look, Kyle Hamilton selected in the first round, performing like a first round pick and all pro this year. Can't we just be happy with that? Why does it have to be, like
I don't need the
by that logic,
stuff
anyone who wasn't selected number 1 overall should just be bitter for the rest of their career that they weren't selected number 1 overall, because by nature they were passed on by somebody. I just get over it, and it's just, again, CJ Carr is obviously over any of these recruiting rankings and such. And it's like, just deal with that. Seeing like the JOK situation was a little different, Octavia, because of the fact that there were, like health issues that were tied to, like different, things about his health and stuff like that were tied to it. But, he's going to make a lot of money here pretty soon when he gets his second contract.
I was going to say, like,
decent money.
And that's the thing. Like, I think JOK is a perfect example because, he could have been bitter and frustrated about where he got selected and falling to the second round. But in my eyes, he fell into a great situation, and he's a tremendous linebacker for the Browns. I mean, look at what he did in that playoff game. Even though they lost, like he did exactly what he did at Notre Dame. He could play in the pass. He could blow up runs in the backfield. He can make one-on-one tackles on the perimeter. He can use his speed. Like, that's got to be motivation for him. And now CJ Carr, the motivation was to get here, and now it's just time to focus on him and, what his goals are moving forward.
Getting better. Yeah, that's right. And he seems like he's got a really good attitude about the whole thing. And the fact that he comes from the kind of football family that he comes from, I'm sure helps with a lot of that, like keeping the priorities right. And, it's like he's not coming in here like talking about how he's going to light the world up this spring. He's, talking more about the fact that he's one of 4 quarterbacks in the room, and he's got a lot to learn, and he's got some good guys that he can go out there and learn from and compete with in the whole thing. So,
yeah. And I think Salty brings up a good point, and not just the NFL, but it's always situational. What position is at your need? Not a lot of teams need a really good safety. And so it's like, if you're not in need of a secondary player, maybe you need an offensive lineman, maybe you need a wide receiver. And so it's not only best player, but it's also, positional best player for what that team needs.
Oh, that's a great point, because safety is, a lower priority. What are the top 10, like if you're going to be a top 10 pick, typically you're either going to be a quarterback, an edge rusher, or a left tackle. You're either the quarterback, someone who can sack the quarterback, or someone who can protect the quarterback. So again, like the fact that he even ended up number 14 being a safety really speaks pretty well of him, because he still went pretty high for his position.
Yeah. And it's like, you look at, Sauce Gardner went ahead of him. And that's a corner. Singletary went ahead of him. The only thing that you can potentially poke holes at is teams who like went with that same position, and that, that player didn't necessarily pan out.
Yeah. So some news today, Bill O'Brien is apparently ready to leave Ohio State, where he just was hired recently as offensive coordinator, to become the head coach back in his hometown at Boston College. So which is the better job, being the offensive coordinator at Ohio State or the head coach at Boston College?
Honestly, excuse me. I would say personally Ohio State, being an assistant coach at Ohio State. If I were going to be a head coach, I wouldn't want to take on the potential undertaking of, what Boston College might be, and especially with kind of current college football landscape. And it's funny because I think Bill O'Brien's ego is getting in his way in this situation. I think he has too big of an ego to not be the head guy. And so rather than be someone who has to follow along at Ohio State, he'd rather, be the head coach somewhere in a not as ideal situation. That's just my personal thought.
Now, I didn't realize, I just saw this today, that Boston, like, he is from that area. So, like, how much that factors in.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But his time hasn't been the same ever since, he was a bad NFL head coach.
Right.
I mean, that's just the honest fact of the situation. And so to me, I think he's chasing back his own ego of saying, I can be a head coach again, which that's your aspiration. That's fine. But I just think that it's a lot more work at Boston College. And I think you can have more success at Ohio State and potentially get, a better gig, kind of like Tommy Rees, right? Like continue to do a couple things for, some good teams for a few years, and then you might get your shot again at an NFL or a better, college head coaching position. It just feels like he's chasing this while also chasing his ego.
Bill O'Brien, because of the background that he had a much better chance, I think, of landing a higher tier Power 5 job had he stayed at Ohio State rather than take a job like this. Because I said this when we were talking about Jeff Hafley last week. I just think that it's not just Hafley, like he gave his reasons and he talked about NIL and recruiting and all these different things. I just feel like the Boston colleges, the Indianas, the Marylands, all these different, the Wake Forest, the Dukes of the world, like maybe you can have one or two good years, but I just feel like because of what NIL has become, it is a much, much steeper uphill climb to try to make those teams consistent winners or even winners for, more than one season in a row, even if it's not consistent, to have multiple winning seasons, because you're just being poached in terms of players for NIL, for all these different things. I just think that it's going to continue. It's always been hard because of the kind of resources that go into these lower level Power 5 jobs. I just think it's going to be even harder. Like they are just fortunate, like Indiana, especially. Indiana and Purdue are so fortunate to be part of the Big Ten where they're getting this big TV rights checks cashed compared to Boston College, who, of course, ACC, lower end, So I don't feel like this is ultimately probably the career move that you want to be making if you're a guy like Bill O'Brien, when you had a chance to be at a premier, high-profile type Power 5 job, going to where you're going, because I just think it's going to be tough for anyone to win at that level going forward because of what NIL has become and the way, players obviously are swapping around so quickly from year to year.
Yeah, I mean, half the battle is your name is going to get your foot in the door.
Yeah.
And I don't think if you're Boston College right now, your foot is getting you in the door. It's getting slammed in the door, and now you got a stub toe. That hurts.
DK says, I don't care if it hurts Ohio State, I'm in favor. Well, unintended consequences, you don't know who they're going to end up getting, so that's part of it as well. There's always that ripple effect, but fill in the blank. It's blank that USC head coach Lincoln Riley says he could see resting players for a game at the end of the regular season if he's undefeated and has a spot locked up in the expanded 12-team playoff field.
To me, it's unnecessary. And the reason why I say like Lincoln Riley saying this is unnecessary is I just feel like it's unnecessary to already start this dialogue. Like we should wait until we get to the situation, the games play themselves, because now we're already planting seeds for ideas when it wasn't even, thought about, brought up, etc. And it's like it's not the NFL, in my opinion, because especially once you get down towards the end at the college football season, I feel like that last one loss could be the difference between a 3 seed and like a 10 seed. And that could be the potential of, getting an at-large and hosting a game, or potentially being, maybe what I would call a wild card team, a lower seed. And so, because like when you get to the end, you're going to be a bunch of 1-loss and 2-loss teams. So if you're already a 1-loss team or undefeated team, and now you're dropping into the category of the 1-loss or the 2-loss, I feel like you're only, hurting yourself in the seeding and a potential better matchup for yourself. So again, I just feel like it's really unnecessary to get into this conversation because it's all situational, right? And so I feel like we shouldn't have this conversation until the situation itself is, upon us.
Not to mention the fact that if you are that team, like if you're USC as an example, or Michigan or Ohio State or whoever it happens to be, and you're sitting in that position at the end of the regular season, one, you're probably talking about a rivalry game because that's where all the rivalry games tend to be right now at the end of the regular season. So like, are you going to sit your best players in a rivalry game and risk losing to a rival like Ryan Day? He's got enough problems beating Michigan right now. Is he going to sit a bunch of guys on top of that, for example? Again, I realize it was Lincoln Riley that said this, but two, just what you're talking about, there's still going to be seeding on the line and the chance to host a game and not just be in the playoff. But if you're undefeated, you're probably, you're also talking about you're going to play in a conference championship game unless you're Notre Dame. So yeah, I agree. I think it is cart way ahead of the horse on this. I thought it was interesting that he brought that up. He actually brought this up on the Pat McAfee show when he was asked about, essentially, do you coach different at the end of the season depending on how things are going, with an eye toward the college football playoff potentially. And that's what he brought up. So I think that is a whole can of worms that he doesn't even want to be thinking about right now, but he went there. Fill in the blank. It's blank that the NFL has announced a week 1 game in Sao Paulo, Brazil next season, where the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be the home team in a Friday night game, week 1.
His head scratching. I've understood, these games, and I think they've done like Germany, they've done London. I guess I don't. In Southern American countries, soccer is the predominant sport. And so I guess I just didn't realize that there is a football fan base down there in Brazil. And then if they're already announcing that it's the Eagles, you'd have to assume that the Eagles are the most popular team down in Brazil, right? And so, I'm all for these professional leagues, whether it's the NBA, the NFL, MLB, expanding their viewership and allowing the game to reach different parts of the world. But to me, it's just really head scratching that Brazil was the choice for the NFL because, again, I just don't know how much organized football is really being played down in Brazil because their everyone bleeds soccer down there. And so I guess, again, it's a little confusing to me, but there's got to be some sort of, reasoning for it. They're not just going to make this whole event for nothing.
Yeah, I mean, they want to sell football. They want to sell jerseys and T-shirts and sweatshirts. Well, maybe not as many sweatshirts in Brazil, but you get the point. Like they want to market the NFL to different parts of the world. So they're taking it to Brazil. They've never played a game in Brazil before. It's the Friday night thing that I find interesting because, they've always said that they're not going to play on Friday night because it's high school night. And now they've got a chance to make a little extra money. And Roger Goodell's going to shop an NFL football game on a Friday night down there in Brazil. It's supposedly going to be the only one, but one is always going to lead to two. There'll be more ultimately. But, that's like to answer your question. They want to market the NFL to the world, and they want to get into as many untapped markets as possible, and they'll continue to do that. I do think it is, as John Kristofik says, a little bit silly, especially the Friday night thing is a bit silly to me. That
they should have done it in Mexico City. I want to see if footballs also fly at elevation.
Well, they've played in Mexico City before, so I think that's again,
my favorite is when the MLB goes to Mexico City. It's damn near playing home run derby in T-ball parks.
Bryce wants to know which of the Super Bowl teams has more Notre Dame players.
Ooh, I think I know this one.
It's one apiece. It's one apiece. Chiefs and 49ers. Do you know who they are?
Chiefs, obviously Tranquill, and isn't Banks the center for the 49ers?
Yes, but actually,
Ian Book's on the
I was going to say, I think Ian Book is a practice squad player.
Yeah, he's active. He's not on the active roster.
Yeah.
So technically, 2 Chiefs, 1 49er.
Yeah, Ian Book is with the Chiefs. He just last month signed a futures deal. Basically practice squad player.
So what we're getting at is they believe that Ian Book plays quarterback like Patrick Mahomes. So that's why he's on the team.
Right. Haven't seen him being promoted this year like they promoted him last year when he was in Philly.
Do you remember when they randomly rolled him out? Did the Saints rolled him out in that Thursday night game?
Oh man, that was
bad. He was just miserable. I mean, couldn't really blame the guy because like what is he supposed to do? But like he was just bad that whole game.
Yeah. Not good. Not good for Ian Book. Do you buy or sell just getting to the Super Bowl as already being a win for Patrick Mahomes this season?
This is a big sell for me. Patrick Mahomes has already won a couple of Super Bowls, lost a couple Super Bowls, and is already in the conversation of, greatest player of all time. He's already being, whether you believe it or not, there are conversations and segments with Patrick Mahomes being compared to Tom Brady. And when you're being compared to Tom Brady, what is it going to boil down to? Super Bowl rings. At this point, it's no longer, a good statistic if you're Patrick Mahomes to make the Super Bowl. You are just like Brady. Every time Brady made it to the Super Bowl, the expectation was that Brady was going to win the Super Bowl. And if you want to be compared with the best, then you got to have similar numbers. So I think he's got to continue to win, all of these Super Bowls. I don't think the expectation is just getting there. It's winning at this point.
Yeah, I'm surprised sort of the way it's been framed with him getting there as, just it seems like when you start to hear people talk like it's a foregone conclusion that the 49ers are going to win and all this different stuff. And, look, I realize the Chiefs receivers are as bad now as Patrick Mahomes has ever had, but he still has Travis Kelce. He won a Super Bowl last year without Tyreek Hill. They're back in the Super Bowl without Tyreek Hill. There's already, again, like people talking about, Travis Kelce's going to retire. Look, he's slowing down a little bit, but he still look at where they are. And the other thing is what is completely overlooked about this Chiefs team and beyond just Patrick Mahomes, the 2 reasons they won, 1, they have Patrick Mahomes. 2, they have the best defense that they have had since Andy Reid has been in Kansas City. And that's what not enough people are talking about is this defense. And so I completely sell this as well. It's not just getting there, because if you want to start talking about, is he the greatest all time? It's not just getting to the Super Bowl with whatever, like really this was a more Brady-esque type, getting to the Super Bowl.
Well,
like
and that's what I think.
Brady, like before Gronk and all that stuff, the supporting cast that Brady had more times than not was not that great. And that's the kind of team that Mahomes has gotten there with just, with the exception of Kelce, a relatively average skill position group on offense, but a really good defense, which was the other thing that was overlooked so much about, the New England Patriots was how good those defenses were.
Yeah, and that's what I was ultimately going to get at. Like Brady didn't have, he had some good Brady a couple of years was thin at, the wide receiver position, but he also had Gronk. He also had Randy Moss. He also had, he had guys that were ultimately good at the end, just like Patrick Mahomes. He's had Tyreek Hill. He's had Travis Kelce. But I think the thing that often gets brought up is, Brady did it with, guys that were bums, essentially. But it's like he also had really good defenses that he could rely on. Those Patriot defenses, like these, I feel like the best thing that you said there was this Chiefs team is like almost identical to those Patriot teams. Really good quarterbacks, really good coaches, and then really solid defenses to fall back on if an issue does arise. And again, Travis Kelce didn't have as productive as a regular season as you might like, but in the playoffs, he's averaging 8 catches, 90 yards, and a touchdown a game. Like he's showing up when it matters the most. And I think that is Patrick Mahomes' security blanket. And then anything that they can get out of Rashee Rice, that's like the exclamation. That is what ultimately is going to take them out, over the top, because you know what you're going to get out of Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. But when you can get extra and you can squeeze that, whatever you can get out of Rashee Rice, that's what's going to take you to the next level. And that's what they were missing throughout the entire season. They just needed someone to step up and be like, I'm going to be the guy to catch the ball other than Travis Kelce consistently. I will line up on sides.
Because it wasn't going to be Kadarius Toney. Yes.
Right. I will just literally catch the ball that you put in my hands every time. That's all that they've been asking for. And Rashee Rice, that's what he's been doing. And so that also is, a big success.
And when you have Patrick Mahomes and you have Travis Kelce, who have been there before, because that's the other thing, like
the experience.
These two teams only played 4 years ago. There are only 19 players in total from the two rosters combined who played in that Super Bowl 4 years ago. So the experience that Mahomes and Kelce have together means maybe more than anything else that's going to happen on that field Sunday night.
Agreed.
All right, so Nicole Auerbach covers college football and basketball for The Athletic. The other day, she tweeted that quarters, which are used in women's college basketball, are better than halves, which are used in men's college hoops. Do you buy or sell it?
I buy 100% that quarters are better than halves. College men's basketball is the only form of basketball that uses halves. The NBA uses quarters. High school uses quarters. Women's uses quarters. I just think that halves make the game not extremely, but in comparison, more boring. It takes longer. I feel like that it is not.
Game flow is so much better with quarters.
Yes, you can break it up, right? You can. There's more. There's more timeout, and then also what I like is the foul situation resets at the beginning of every quarter. You're not restricted to the X amount of fouls and getting into the bonus in the halves like you are in comparison to the NBA and the women's game. I just think the game flow is better, the game goes by better, and the game is more entertaining and a better product when it's broken up into quarters. It gets stagnant in halves.
Right. Thanks for the super chat, Anthony. The only thing that I question is, like, if men's college basketball were going to go to quarters, just what you talked about, like with the fouls, would you reset the fouls? Because they don't in the NBA, they don't in high school either. But those levels also play with quarters and not just halves, unlike men's college basketball. Like, do you have to reset the fouls the way the women's game does? You don't have 1-and-1 in the women's game. In the women's game, the limit is 5 fouls per quarter. Once you get to 5, it's 2 shots all the way. But again, I think that helps speed up the flow of the game because you don't have all the extra jostling and like resetting and all that stuff after you shoot the front end of the 1-and-1 if he makes it, and then you go back and then you shoot the second one. So I don't like, would you want to see the fouls reset? Would you want to keep the 1-and-1 or would you want to just do that the same as the women's as well? Because I agree with everything that you're saying. Like, game flow standpoint, there's a reason everybody else, literally everybody else except men's college basketball is playing with quarters. The NBA does, high school boys and girls do, international men and women do, but for whatever reason, the men's college game is still stuck with halves.
Yeah, I would like the foul situation to be similar to the women's just because you are, what's the best way to put it? College players are still amateurs, and there's going to be more fouling just because of naturally not being as skilled as NBA players. And so I think naturally when you get into the NBA, it's professional for a reason. Like those fouls shouldn't reset. You should be able to guard better. Like you're a professional NBA player. But when you're college, not everyone's, there's a lot of amateurs at that level. And so the last thing, me personally, I hate when college games come down to so many free throws and refs at the end and, all these fouls and et cetera. I lean more on, let's just keep the game moving, not as many 1-and-1s. And again, we don't need to not reset for that reason, because it's just, you're going to get so many fouls built up, I feel like. And that's the last thing I want to see. I hate when games are determined or steered by referees.
I agree. I completely agree. And I think that like there are still some things in the women's game that, like just the flow of the game, I think, is the biggest thing. The flow of the game, the way the game flows. And like when you look at, again, I think you're cutting down on some of the extra jostling and things like that. You're preventing, some of that excess contact that you really don't need. I think it would clean a lot of stuff up in the men's game, but for whatever reason, they're still resistant to it right now. All right, well, that's going to do it for tonight. Anthony, again, appreciate your super chat. I'll be off and on the road tomorrow. Jesse and Vince will be here doing a little mailbag action on Wednesday. There will be a show on Thursday, and we'll be back on Friday as well with the Super Bowl props and some other rapid fire type stuff on the Friday show. Remember, Fridays we start at 5 o'clock Eastern time. Hit the like button before you leave, and of course, subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast platform. Jesse, enjoyed it as always. I will talk to you later.
See ya.
We'll talk to everybody else later as well. IB Nation Sports Talk.